Imagine the metallic smell of blood mixed with the sour stench of an advanced infection in a small, poorly ventilated bathroom. A man is sweating cold, holding a thick needle, shaking with pain. He is not a doctor. He is not in a sterile hospital. He is at the sink of his own home, about to perform surgery on himself. His left arm pulses purple, swollen like a party balloon about to burst. Inside that monstrous bicep, there is not just muscle. There are liters of an oily substance, mixed with bacteria that are devouring his flesh from the inside out. He takes a deep breath, touches the blade to his stretched skin, and the sound you hear is not human. It is the sound of a dam breaking. What explodes from inside his arm stains the mirror, the sink, and the floor a dark red and yellow. The most hated man in bodybuilding has just made his biggest mistake. Gregg Valentino wanted to have the biggest arms on planet Earth. He succeeded, but the price was not paid in sweat at the gym. It was paid in the emergency room, with doctors fighting not to amputate his rotting limb. Today, we are going to enter the mind and body of the man who turned bodybuilding into a horror show. We will dissect the anatomy of a muscle explosion. If you have a weak stomach, leave now. Subscribe to the channel, because what you are going to see today makes the Russian Popeye case look like child's play. Welcome to the autopsy of an ego that exploded. To understand how a man reaches the point of exploding his own arm in his home bathroom, we need to go back in time, too long before the fame and the oil. We need to look at the small, insecure child living in the shadows of New York. Gregg Valentino was not born a monster. He was forged in insecurity and polished by an inferiority complex. From a very early age, he realized that the world respects size, and he had no size. He was a short boy with a mediocre bone structure, the kind of person who would go unnoticed in any crowd. But Gregg had something that most normal people do not have: a sick obsession with being noticed, whatever the cost. Bodybuilding entered his life not as a sport, but as armor. He looked at big men and saw power. He saw that no one messed with them. And there, in those neighborhood gyms full of testosterone and sweat, he made a silent oath. He would be the biggest of them all, or ring. The beginning was like any other. Weightlifting, a diet of chicken and sweet potatoes, regulated sleep, and, to the surprise of many, Gregg had reasonable genetics. He grew. He got strong. He won local championships naturally. But reasonable was never enough for someone with a mind broken by muscle dysmorphia. He looked in the mirror, and where everyone saw an athletic and muscular body, Gregg saw a scrawny chicken. Muscle dysmorphia is a psychiatric cancer. It distorts reality, making the giant feel like an ant. And it was this cursed voice in his head that led him to his first contact with chemistry. We are not talking about oil yet, but traditional anabolic steroids, testosterone, nandrolone, dianabol. When the first needle pierced the skin of Gregg's glute, he did not feel pain. He felt relief. It was as if he had found the key to unlock the potential that nature had denied him. The results were fast and brutal. His body responded to the drugs with impressive violence. His muscles swelled. His veins popped out like road maps on his arms, and his strength tripled. But along with the muscles came the dark side of hormones: aggression, paranoia, and uncontrolled libido. Gregg was no longer just a gym. He was becoming a figure of the underworld. To afford the cavalier doses of drugs his body demanded, he could not have a regular office job. He needed fast money, and in large quantities. That is how he got into trafficking. But he was not selling marijuana on the corner. Gregg became one of the biggest steroid distributors on the American East Coast. He was the guy who supplied the poison for the other monsters. His life became a low-budget action movie. Guns, cash hidden in shoeboxes, fast cars, and, of course, the drugs. He lived on the edge, sleeping with a pistol under his pillow and a syringe on his nightstand. The feeling of invincibility that steroids gave, mixed with the real danger of crime. But human biology has a ceiling. There came a moment, after years of steroid abuse, when Gregg's arms stopped growing. He had reached what we call a genetic plateau. Even with all the chemistry in the world running through his veins, the muscle fibers could no longer hypertrophy. He had arms of 50 centimeters, which is huge for most. But for Gregg's sick mind, that was pathetic. He wanted 60, 70 centimeters. He wanted arms that defied logic and anatomy. He wanted to be a circus freak. It was in this moment of supreme frustration that he heard about something new. It was not a hormone. It was not something that made the muscle grow for real. It was a cheat. It was Synthol and isocaline. The principle was simple and terrifying. If the muscle does not grow anymore, let us inflate it like a tire. Isocaline, an Italian steroid, caused immediate local inflammation, swelling the muscle for a few days. Gregg loved the effect, but isocaline wore off quickly. He needed something permanent. Needeth. Oil. The decision to inject oil into his own body marks the final transition from athlete to psychiatric patient. Gregg was no longer worried about strength, symmetry, or the beauty of bodybuilding. He was worried about the measuring tape. He started buying oils in unlabeled bottles, coming from underground laboratories. And the technique. There was no technique. He would take veterinary syringes, made for horses, fill them with 3, 5, 10 milliliters of oil and drive them deep into his biceps and triceps. The pain was excruciating. Imagine injecting a thick liquid into compact meat. The oil tore the fibers, pushed the nerves, and created pockets of internal pressure. But when Gregg looked in the mirror and saw his swollen, red, throbbing arm, the pain turned into pleasure. The arm was bigger. The monster was growing. He developed an insane protocol. He injected every day, in multiple spots. The muscle tissue, repeatedly assaulted, began to change. The human body, wise as it, is trying to defend itself. Gregg's immune system went to total war against that invading oil. Since it could not eliminate the substance, the body began to create scar tissue, fibrous and hard, around the oil to isolate it. What Gregg called muscle was actually a disgusting mixture of oil, pus, dead tissue, and scar. His arms lost their human shape. They looked like deformed sacks of potatoes grafted onto his shoulders. The bodybuilding community, which values aesthetics and proportion, looked at that with horror. Gregg began to be ridiculed in magazines and forums. They called him a clown, a disgrace to the sport. But here is the engagement point you need to understand about the mind of a narcissist. He did not care if the attention was good or bad, as long as it was attention. Hate fed him. He went to bodybuilding expos, wore tiny tank tops, and displayed those grotesque arms of almost 70 centimeters with pride. He loved shocking people. Children cried when they saw him. Women looked away in disgust, and men felt a mixture of repulsion and morbid curiosity. Gregg Valentino had become what he always wanted. Unforgettable, but he did not know that. Inside those gigantic arms, a biological time bomb was ticking. The dirty injections, done without hygiene, in filthy bathrooms, were inviting bacteria to a feast in his flesh. He reused needles. Yes, you heard that right. The man who had money to buy luxury cars was lazy or careless enough to use the same needle several times, wiping it only on his dirty t-shirt or with a little alcohol. Every puncture was Russian roulette with infection. And luck, my friends, is a finite resource. Gregg had been abusing his luck for years, and fate was about to come and collect the debt with extremely high interest. Gregg's double life was about to collapse. On one side, the paranoid drug dealer who saw enemies in every shadow. On the other, the bizarre bodybuilder who destroyed his own body in search of cheap applause. He was surrounded by sycophants, parasites who lived off his money and encouraged him to get bigger and bigger, more and more monstrous. No one had the courage to say, "Gregg, stop. Your arms are turning purple." No one loved him enough to save him from himself. And you watching this now, maybe you think this is far from your reality, but how many times have you not done something stupid just to be accepted? How many times have you not posted a fake photo to get likes? Gregg's disease is the disease of our society, only raised to the 1,000th power. We laugh at him, but we are accomplices in this culture of appearances. If you are enjoying this brutal dissection of the human mind, stop now and subscribe to the channel. We do not sugarcoat anything here. We show the naked, raw, and bloody truth. Click the subscribe button and turn on the bell, because what will happen in the next chapter will make your stomach turn. Gregg was on top of the bizarre world, but the fall would be painful and wet. The infection started silently, a small lump, a different heat in his left arm. Gregg ignored it. He thought it was just another inflammation from training or the oil. He took some anti-inflammatories and continued injecting. No pain, no gain. Right? Wrong. This time, it was not growth. It was necrosis. The bacteria had found a perfect place to multiply. Inside the oil pockets, protected from blood and antibiotics, the arm began to throb with a pain that not even the strongest painkillers could silence. Gregg spent nights awake, sweating cold, with his arm propped up on pillows, feeling as if he had a heart beating inside his bicep. But the damn ego would not let him go to the doctor. I am Gregg Valentino. I do not need help. I solve my own problems. And it was this arrogance that led him to make the most stupid decision of his life. He decided that he himself would perform the surgery. He decided that he would drain the abscess alone, at home, as if he were squeezing a giant pimple. Little did he know that he was about to pierce a dam of rot that would change his life forever. Get ready. In the next chapter, we are going to enter that bathroom with him. We are going to see the blood. We are going to smell the stench. And we are going to witness the exact moment when the dream turned into a nightmare. Gregg Valentino was about to explode. Literally, follow the descent into hell. The clock struck 3 in the morning, and the silence of the house contrasted with the deafening noise in Gregg Valentino's head. He was locked in the bathroom, the only place where his sick privacy was guaranteed. The cold, white light of the room reflected in the mirror, showing a man who looked like he had aged 10 years in 1 week. His left arm no longer looked like an arm. It looked like a piece of rotting meat that had been forgotten outside the fridge under the hot sun. The skin was stretched to the point of shining, with a coloration that varied between deep purple and necrotic black. The heat radiating from that limb was so intense he could feel it through his teeth. It was local fever, a massive infection cooking the muscle tissue from the inside out. Gregg looked at the sink counter. There were no sterilized scalpels, surgical gloves, or iodine fields. There were only old syringes, some thick gauge needles used for cattle, and paper towels. The arrogance that made him believe he could build a better body than nature now made him believe he could operate better than a surgeon. He was delirious with pain and fever. Logic had already left the building. He took one of the syringes, attached the thickest needle he had, and took a deep breath. The plan was simple and stupid. He would stick the needle into the most swollen part, pull the plunger, and drain what he thought was just accumulated blood or a little water. The first puncture was a miscalculation. The skin was so hard, fibrous due to the scars of years of injections, that the needle bent before penetrating. Gregg cursed, sweat running down his forehead and dripping into the sink. He changed the needle. This time, he used more force. He pushed the metal against his own flesh with the violence of someone who hates himself. The needle broke. The dermis went through the fat layer and entered what should have been the bicep. But there was no muscle there. There was only a cavern full of putrid liquid. When he pulled the plunger of the syringe, what came was not bright red blood. It was a thick, dark, foul-smelling mixture. He managed to draw a few milliliters of that poison. It relieved the pressure for a second, but it was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. The pain returned, stronger, throbbing, as if someone were hammering a rusty nail into his arm bone. Despair took over. He did not want to go to the hospital. He was afraid of being arrested, as he was a known drug dealer, and he was afraid of losing his arm, which was his only identity. So, he decided to do something that would make any sane person vomit. He decided the needle was too small. He needed a cut. He needed to open the floodgate. Gregg took an improvised sharp object. He did not sterilize the skin. He simply aimed at the most critical point, where the infection seemed to pulse, with a life of its own, and cut. What happened next was worthy of a horror movie. It was not a normal bleed. It was an explosion. The internal pressure was so great that, upon breaking the skin barrier, the liquid was ejected with violence. Pus, mixed with old oil and coagulated blood, splashed onto the mirror, the wall, the sink, and Gregg's own face. The smell invaded the bathroom instantly. It was the unmistakable smell of cell death, a sweet and rotten odor that makes the human brain go into biological hazard alert. He looked at his arm and saw a gaping hole, leaking endlessly. The relief from the pressure was replaced by absolute panic. The bleeding would not stop. He had hit a major blood vessel in his surgical stupidity. Blood gushed, mixing with the filth of the infection on the bathroom floor. Gregg tried to stop it with paper towels, but they became soaked in seconds. Dizziness hit. He was losing blood volume fast. The room began to spin. The Hulk was falling. He realized, in that moment of clarity that only the proximity of death brings, that he had gone too far. He screamed for help, or maybe he just moaned, but someone found him. The scene was dantesque. A giant man, lying in a pool of his own rotten blood, holding an arm that looked like it had been chewed by a shark. The ambulance was called. The paramedics, used to car accidents and shootings, were shocked when they entered that bathroom. They had never seen self-mutilation of that level caused purely by vanity. They stopped the bleeding as best they could and raced to the hospital. Gregg was going into septic shock. Bacteria were already in his bloodstream, traveling to his heart, lungs, and brain. Arriving at the emergency room, the medical team cut his t-shirt and exposed the masterpiece of disaster. The doctor on duty looked at it, and his first reaction was disbelief. "What did you put in here?" he asked. Gregg, half unconscious, babbled something about steroids. But the doctor knew that was not steroids. That was a foreign body. The surgeon was called in a hurry. The initial diagnosis was brutal: potential necrotizing fasciitis and compartment syndrome. Translating into plain English, the infection was eating the flesh and the pressure was killing the nerves. The standard solution for this is immediate amputation to save the patient's life. Gregg heard the word amputation and tried to fight on the stretcher. "Do not cut my arm. Do not cut my arm." It was pathetic. The man was dying, but his biggest concern was still losing his precious inches of biceps. The surgeon, an ethical professional, decided to try one last maneuver before sawing the bone. He would perform an aggressive surgical debridement. He would open the arm from end to end and remove everything that was dead. If anything functional remained, the arm would stay. If not, medical waste would be the limb's destination. Gregg was put under by general anesthesia. His nightmare was just beginning, but the doctor's nightmare was underway. When the scalpel opened the skin for real, under the light of the operating room, what they found was worse than they imagined. The oil had infiltrated everything. There was no clear distinction between muscle and fat. Everything was a gray, gelatinous mass. The surgeon had to excavate Gregg's arm. He removed huge chunks of necrotic tissue. He drained pockets of pus that were hidden deep, near the humerus bone. It was controlled carnage. The doctor had to cut out parts of the bicep that were unrecoverable. Gregg would wake up with a crater in his arm. All that volume, those 70 centimeters of pride, were being thrown into a metal basin for incineration. What remained was a shredded arm, full of drains stitched up like a macabre patchwork quilt. He survived the surgery, but the battle against infection was not yet won. He was taken to the ICU, bombarded with next-generation antibiotics, the ones reserved for hospital superbugs. When Gregg woke up, the pain from the surgery was 10 times worse than the pain from the infection. But the emotional pain was a real blow. He looked at his bandaged arm, much smaller than it was before, and cried. He did not cry out of regret at first. He cried for the loss of size. It is hard for us rational people to understand this. But for an addict, the drug is more important than life. And Gregg's drug was size. He felt as if his masculinity had been castrated. You watching? Stop and think. How far would you go for a like? How far would you go to be the man on your street? Gregg went to the point of almost leaving his daughter an orphan. Yes, he had a family. And while he played doctor in the bathroom, his family was in the living room waiting, not knowing that their father was killing himself on the other side of the door. This is pure selfishness. This is the disease of vanity in its terminal stage. If you are shocked by human stupidity, leave your like now. This helps YouTube show this video to more people and, who knows, prevent some 15-year-old kid from making the same mistake. Your like can save an arm, literally. Comment below. Vanity has limits. I want to see how many of you have your head in the right place. Gregg left the hospital days later with a deformed arm, missing pieces, a horrible scar that looked like a giant zipper, and an astronomical hospital bill. But life, which has a sadistic sense of humor, was not done with him yet. He had lost his arm, but he still had the drug business. And the police, who had been monitoring him for months, chose exactly this moment of weakness to strike. What happens when you lose your physical identity, your health, and, right after, your freedom? Gregg was about to swap the hospital bed for the concrete bed of prison. And believe me, in jail, arms swollen with oil, do not command respect. They become targets. Gregg Valentino's cardboard empire was crumbling, brick by brick. In the next chapter, we will see the final fall, prison, public humiliation, and how the media turned a sick man's tragedy into global entertainment. We will see how he became the man whose arm exploded and how he tried to capitalize on his own misfortune. The story gets dirtier before it ends. Stay tuned. The fall of an underworld king is never silent, and Gregg Valentino's was deafening. Shortly after having his arm shredded on the operating table, the door to his house was not opened by friends or family, but battered down by a police battering ram. The operation was massive. Uniformed men, armed with rifles, invaded the steroid sanctuary that Gregg had built. He was not arrested for having giant arms or for being a medical freak. He was arrested because he was one of the biggest distributors of illegal anabolic steroids in that region. The irony was cruel. The man who destroyed his own body with drugs would now be destroyed by the judicial system for selling them. Gregg was dragged out of his house in handcuffs, his operated arm still throbbing under the cold metal cuffs. The local news cameras were there, of course. The image was pathetic. A deformed giant, limping, being pushed into a police car. In that moment, he lost everything. His cars, his dirty money, his house, and, most important to him, his freedom. His destination was no longer the bodybuilding stage or VIP parties. His destination was a 2x3-meter cell in a maximum security state prison. Prison is a place where vanity dies of starvation. Inside, there are no large mirrors to admire biceps. There are no oils to inject. And there is certainly no special diet to maintain muscle mass. For Gregg, prison was a double punishment. First, the physical and mental punishment of incarceration. Second, and worse, the punishment of watching his body wither day after day. Without the constant doses of testosterone and without abundant food, the Hulk began to shrink. The oil that remained in his arms hardened even more, creating visible lumps that looked like tumors. He was no longer the strongest guy in the yard. He was just a strange man with deformed arms. The other inmates did not respect him. In fact, he became a joke. "Look at the balloon man," they said. The reputation he built with needles was worth nothing in the real world of violent crime. Gregg had to learn to survive, not with the size of his arms, but with his mouth. He realized that, to avoid being eaten by the jail sharks, he needed to be the court jester. He began to tell his stories, exaggerating every detail, turning his tragedy into entertainment for the murderers and thieves who shared oxygen with him. It was there, on the cold prison floor, that the media character we know today was born. After serving his sentence and leaving jail, Gregg found a different world. A was broke with a ruined name and no prospects. But he noticed something disturbing. The internet was being born, and people were fascinated by weirdness. A documentary called The Man Whose Arms Exploded aired on TLC and went viral worldwide. Millions of people watched the scene of the blood in the bathroom, the disgusting surgery, and the interview with that man with a thick accent and defiant attitude. Instead of feeling shame and hiding in a cave, Gregg saw a golden opportunity. He embraced the title of the most hated man in bodybuilding. He realized that hate generates clicks, and clicks generate money. Gregg started giving interviews to anyone who would listen. He did not apologize. Edit notsa. "Don't do this, kids. On the contrary." He laughed at his own misfortune. He told how he used the same needles, how he sold drugs, how he fooled the police. He became the villain everyone loved to hate. The sensationalist media loved him. He was the perfect guest, controversial, loud, and visually shocking. Gregg launched his own column in bodybuilding magazines, called Ramblings of a Freak. He wrote about the dirty side of the sport, exposing backstage secrets, accusing other athletes of using the same junk he used. He became a snitch, a pariah. The serious fitness community wanted to see him dead, but they could not stop talking about him. Gregg had hacked the attention system long before digital influencers existed. He understood that in the attention economy, infamy is worth as much as fame. But this toxic fame came with a psychological price that no one saw. While he smiled for the cameras and showed off the horrible scars on his arms as if they were war trophies, inside he was hollow. He had become a caricature of himself. He was no longer Gregg, the human being. He was Gregg Valentino, the oil monster. He was invited to events just to be pointed at and ridiculed. "Come see the freak." And he went, took the check, and went home alone. It is the prostitution of one's own dignity in exchange for relevance. His family suffered in silence. Imagine being the child of this man. Imagine going to school and hearing your classmates commenting on the video of your father bleeding in the bathroom or being arrested on TV. Gregg sacrificed the peace of everyone around him on the altar of his ego. He said he did it to pay the bills, but deep down everyone knew the truth. He was addicted to the spotlight, even if the light shining on him was that of a police interrogation or a tabloid TV show that treated him like trash. The media circus around Gregg created a dangerous side effect: normalization. Impressionable young men looked at him and did not see a warning. They saw a fast track to fame. If I get giant and bizarre like him, I will also be on TV. It was Gregg Valentino's generation that opened the doors for the Kirill Tereshins of the world. He was patient, Ziron of the Synthol epidemic. He showed that you do not need to be an elite athlete to be famous. You just need to be shocking enough that no one can look away. Gregg started selling DVDs, t-shirts, and even supplements. He monetized his own tragedy with brutal efficiency. He turned pus and blood into dollars. But look closely into his eyes. In old interviews, there is a deep sadness, an aggressive defense of someone who knows he is a fraud. He screams, curses, and threatens, but it is all armor to protect the insecure child who still lives inside, the one who thought he would only be loved if he were big. Gregg's legacy in prison and in the media is a lesson on modern society. We feed these monsters. We click, we share, we comment. We are the audience of this digital Roman Colosseum where Gregg is the gladiator who mutilates himself for our entertainment. He understood this better than anyone. He looked at the bloodthirsty crowd and said, "You want a show? I will give you a show you will never forget." And he kept his promise, whatever the cost. Now, years later, with a marked body, a calloused mind, and a destroyed reputation, what is left? The party is over. The lights have gone out, and silence has returned. But the story still has a final chapter. What happens to the monster when he gets old? What happens when the oil settles and health collects the final bill for decades of abuse? Gregg Valentino is still alive, but at what cost? In the next and final chapter, we will make the final assessment. We will see how he is today. What are the permanent sequels he carries? And what is the final and surprising message he leaves for those thinking of following in his footsteps? Prepare for the final verdict. The autopsy of Gregg Valentino's legacy is coming to an end, and the conclusion will leave you thinking for days. Do not go anywhere. If you made it this far, you need to see how this ends. Subscribe now if you haven't already, because the end of this story is a punch to the stomach of reality. Let's go to the last act. We have reached the end of the line. But Gregg Valentino's story does not end with a happily ever after nor with an early funeral. Fate reserved something perhaps crueler for him. Survival with sequels. Today, Gregg is over 60 years old. He survived the arm explosion, survived drug overdoses, survived prison, and survived internet hate. But he did not come out unscathed. If you look at him today, you will see a man who carries on his body the map of his terrible decisions. His left arm, the one that exploded in the bathroom, possesses a deep scar, a trench in the flesh that looks like it was made by a shark. Part of the bicep disappeared forever, removed by the surgeon to take out the rot. That size he loved so much, for which he almost died, no longer exists. What remains is deformity, but physical scars are the easy part. The real damage is in systemic health. Years of abusing anabolic steroids in cavalier doses exacted a high price. Gregg lives today with a constant ghost of heart and liver problems. The heart, forced to pump blood to an artificial muscle mass, intoxicated for decades, is tired. The liver, the body's filter, was bombarded by oral chemical compounds that are pure poison. He is a man who needs to monitor every heartbeat, every blood test, knowing he pushed his biology to the edge of the cliff and hung there for too long. He is not a healthy senior enjoying retirement. He is a war survivor where the war was against himself. And what does he do today? Gregg Valentino has become the voice of experience in the bodybuilding underworld. He has podcasts, writes articles, and appears in YouTube videos, but his posture has changed in a strange and complex way. He no longer recommends that kids do what he did. On the contrary, he often says, "I am an idiot. Don't be like me." He uses his own tragedy as a cautionary tale. He looks at the camera and tells young people that Synthol is trash, that drugs will destroy your family and your life. It seems noble, right? It seems like he redeemed himself. But, as your skeptical narrator, I need to point out the irony. He still lives off the attention this tragedy generates. He sells the story of his failure. He monetized regret. Gregg has become a sort of crazy uncle of the internet. People like him today not because they admire him, but because he is authentic in his madness. He speaks the truth about drug use and professional sports, something most athletes hide. He exposes the hypocrisy of the fitness industry. He says, "Look at me. I am the result of lies and obsession." In a way, he is the most honest man in a world of liars, even if his honesty comes wrapped in curse words and crime stories. He is living proof that you can lose your arm, lose your freedom, lose your dignity. But if you have charisma and a shocking story, the internet will give you a microphone. But do not be fooled. Gregg's life is not glamorous. He does not live in mansions. He lives a modest life, struggling to remain relevant in a world that creates new monsters every day. He sees the new Synthol kids, like the Kirill Tereshin we showed in the last video, and feels a mixture of pity and anger. He knows he opened that door. He knows that every kid injecting oil today saw a video of Gregg Valentino 10 years ago. He is the father of a generation of deformed people, and that is a weight he will carry to the grave. He did not leave a legacy of athletic excellence. He left an instruction manual on how to destroy oneself. The big question that hangs in the air is, was it worth it? Gregg says in interviews that he does not regret everything, that he lived life on his own terms. But when the cameras turn off, when he is alone at home massaging the shredded arm that hurts on cold days, does he really believe that? Was it worth missing the birth of important family moments to be in jail? Was it worth being known worldwide as the man whose arm exploded instead of being known as a good father or a good athlete? Fame is a powerful drug, and Gregg had an overdose of it. The high wore off, and the hangover lasts to this day. The story of Gregg Valentino and that of Kirill Tereshin are two sides of the same rotten coin. Both teach us about the fragility of the human mind in the face of aesthetic pressure. We live in an era where image is everything, where Instagram filters and fake muscles are worth more than character and health. Gregg was just an extreme product of our time. He is not a monster who came from Mars. He is a monster created by our consumer society, by our obsession with bigger, better, faster. We created Gregg. We applauded the circus, and now we watch the scars. If you learned anything from this bloody journey, it is this. There are no shortcuts. The body you build with lies, be it oil or Photoshop, is a sandcastle. The tide of reality always comes, and it knocks everything down. Do not trade your health for likes. Do not trade your freedom for inches of arm. The only thing you should inflate is your brain, not your biceps with cooking oil. Be smart. Learn from the mistakes of others, because Gregg Valentino's mistakes cost too much to be repeated by you. We end the oil saga here, but medical horror and the real stories that science tries to hide do not stop. The world is full of bizarre cases, broken minds, and bodies pushed to the limit, and we are going to investigate all of them. If you have a strong stomach and want to see what traditional media is afraid to show, you already know what to do. Subscribe to the Anatomy of Disaster channel now. Turn on the notification bell, because the next video will deal with a topic that is right under your nose and could kill you while you sleep. Do not miss Italiano. Leave your like if you survived this story and share it with that friend who keeps talking about taking poison to grow. Save a life today. I am your narrator. And remember, the human body is a perfect machine until human vanity decides to break it. Until the next autopsy.